Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining. My name is Megan Deeney. I'll be the technical manager for this ANH side event on approaches to measuring self-efficacy led by Meredith and team. And thank you so much for taking part in ANH 2022. And we look forward to a really exciting and interesting discussion today.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks everyone for joining today, the side event on approaches to measuring self-efficacy. And thanks for colleagues from IFPRI for joining. We have colleagues from Helen Keller and IFPRI here today. And thanks to the ANH Academy for having us. Just want to do a quick round of introductions of the facilitators today. I'm Meredith Jackson de Graffenried. I'm a technical advisor with Helen Keller International.
I'm Greg Seymour. I'm a research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hazel Malapit, Senior Research Coordinator at IFPRI, working with Greg on the Women's Empowerment and Agriculture Index. And thanks for joining us. Over to Callum.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. This is Abul Kalam. I'm working as a research manager at the Helen Keller International based in Bangladesh. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. So just a real quick overview. We're gonna, Greg's gonna give a presentation on the self-efficacy module in the ProWEA, and then Callum's going to present on some research we've done on self-efficacy in Cambodia and Bangladesh. And then we're just gonna move to discussion. We'd like to ask people, we'll be using a Google Doc to have people let us know what tools and methods they've used for self-efficacy or other dimensions of women's empowerment, and then move into a discussion on how to decide when to use pre-made tools versus going through the process of designing tools. And then Hazel's gonna wrap it up for us at the end. So over to you, Greg.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about how we measure self-efficacy in the project level Women's Empowerment and Agriculture Index, or ProWEA, as I'm going to refer to it throughout. So starting just with some background for those of you who are not already familiar with ProWEA. So ProWEA is a multidimensional survey-based index for measuring women's empowerment, agency, and inclusion in the agricultural sector. It's based, so when I say survey-based, what I mean is that it's based on individual survey interviews conducted with, with a woman and her partner or spouse from that same household. In some instances, it can also be calculated and conducted with just a woman from a household in the event of a female-only, female-headed household if there's not a male spouse. It's comprised of 10 equally weighted indicators, so binary indicators. So if someone's considered adequate or inadequate in each of these indicators, that measure 3 different types of agency. So instrumental agency, the power to, intrinsic agency, power from within, and then collective agency, power with others, from others. It's preceded by kind of the original WEA, which was launched about 10 years ago now. Measured some of the same. There's a lot of overlap, but ProWEA is a kind of an evolution of the original WEA, and also of the abbreviated WEA that was launched a few years. There was a shorter version of the original WEA. So I have here on the wheel here, it shows the all of the 10 different indicators. So you'll see that it primarily, the bulk of ProWEA is focused on instrumental agency. So the red and yellow here, things like input in productive decisions, ownership of land and other assets, visiting important locations. There's also, like I had mentioned, a collective agency component that focuses on group membership, and intrinsic agency, where which includes self-efficacy, which is what we're going to talk about. I'm also realizing that this is an outdated graphic, so it actually has 12 indicators, 2 of which have been subsequently dropped. So sorry for that confusion. So we're going to focus on self-efficacy. So just some background, a little bit of orientation here. So self-efficacy, there's other definitions, though. One of the most popular comes from Bandura. So self-efficacy is the belief in one's capabilities to organize and execute the courses of action required to manage prospective situations. It can be. It traditionally self-efficacy was defined to be domain specific. So we're referring to prospective situations within a certain domain. More recently, it can also be defined kind of in a generalized form. So generalized self-efficacy, in which case we're thinking about the belief in one's capabilities across a variety of different situations. So why is self-efficacy important? So it influences the choices people make, the effort people put forth in taking action in regard to those choices. It affects persistence, so how long we persist when we confront obstacles, or when we face failure. And then it also influences how we feel. So you can think about self-efficacy, generalized self-efficacy, as something that one accumulates over their lifespan, based on kind of their successes and failures across different tasks. So I think it's kind of, I think it relates to how we think about agency. We think about it as a key component of intrinsic agency. So I realize I didn't give a definition for agency, but we're thinking there about kind of the ability to make strategic life choices, to have power over guiding your life and important decisions. So that's sort of that's kind of a real quick briefer on self-efficacy. On to now thinking about how we measure this in ProWea or in a survey. So self-efficacy was, so 10 years ago when we launched ProWea, we surveyed the landscape, like a whole bunch of, and there's different tools out there for measuring self-efficacy. A number of them are domain specific. We thought for ProWea, which is designed for use in impact evaluations and comparison across, across projects. So for like considering like a portfolio of different projects, we wanted something, we thought it made more sense to focus on generalized self-efficacy. So at the time, one of the newer validated tools that was out there was this new general self-efficacy scale. I have it came from a 2001 paper by Chen et al. So it's 8 items. So I will be able to achieve most of the goals that I have set for myself. When facing difficult tasks, I am certain that I will accomplish them. In general, I think I can obtain outcomes that are important to me. I believe I can succeed at most any endeavor to which I set my mind. I will be able to successfully overcome many challenges. I am confident that I can perform effectively on many different tasks, and compared to other people, I can do most tasks very well. And finally, even when things are tough, I can perform quite well. So all of these would be read, and then people would be each following each someone's asks, like to what extent on a scale of 1 to 5, say, do you agree with this? Is this true for you? So that's the we included this full 8 item in the initial pilots of ProWea, and so it was included that we piloted ProWea in a series of as part of the impact evaluations of several 7 that included this instrument, rural development projects in South Asia and West and East Africa. So it was those impact evaluations occurred over the past 3 or 4 years. Recently, so as upon completion of the inlines, we started to dig more into the data, and one of the things we looked at, because one of the challenges of ProWea is that it can be a time burden for enumerators. So it takes around it takes around 30 minutes, and so we're always trying to look for ways we can streamline it. And one of those, so we looked specifically at this module about whether we could make any cuts. And so what we've settled on, kind of based on some exploratory factor analysis, confirmatory factor analysis, that sort of psychometrics, what I refer to here. We found that we could cut, that we found some redundancy. And so we found that we could cut kind of the 4 items here that are crossed out, that all have pretty clear, pretty close, or closely related to one other statement here. So there's kind of like 2 items per subconstruct you can think of. So we found that we could cut these 4 items and still kind of maintain without that much of a loss of information. And so that's what we've settled on. And this is the so these 4 items in red are the self-efficacy tool module that's currently included in ProWea. We've done quite a bit of validation work to kind of back up that establish, so we're pretty confident that these items can work well in different contexts. And there's more. What we haven't done is really, and I think it's very cool that Meredith has, is to see how self-efficacy aligns or correlates with different outcomes. And so we haven't done that as much, and that's kind of on the future agenda for the ProWea team. I'm going to close there, and I will turn it back over to Meredith. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Greg. Colum is going to give a brief presentation on what we've been doing in Cambodia and Bangladesh.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Okay, so before going to the main presentation, the title of our presentation is to present approaches to measure self-efficacy, results from cognitive testing of ProWea in Cambodia and self-efficacy research in Bangladesh. So firstly, I will be speaking about a little brief about the study in Cambodia, and then I'll come up with our experience that we conducted a study on self-efficacy with emic validity in Bangladesh. So the background of the Cambodia study was to understand the confusion results with 2 indicators of women empowerment, that is self-efficacy and decision-making, or what we call decision-making autonomy. And basically in a 4-year project implemented by Helen Keller International and the Center for Research on Women, we included the ProWea in the baseline survey. We found some dubious result in relation to specific indicators of the ProWea, and that is, as I mentioned, self-efficacy and decision-making. Specifically, almost during the baseline, specifically almost all the women who were interviewed indicated they gave decision-making input to production, but previous surveys and implementation experience in Cambodia found different results. For self-efficacy, half of the respondents chose neither agree nor disagree response option, which indicated a potential lack of understanding of the survey questions. That was that included 8 questions that Greg were showing in the previous presentation. And the other half of the respondent chose agree, which is also surprising for us. So further reflection, we then spoke to the project staffs, and that reflected on the realization that a specific wording of the survey question are open to multiple interpretation in English. So that is potentially not translated well in Khmer. This is the language they speak in Cambodia. And given these results, we decided to conduct a study that is based on cognitive testing of the self-efficacy and decision-making modules. So the main purpose of the cognitive testing self-efficacy was to understand those 4 recall, that is based on comprehension, retrieval, judgment, and response. And that was based on Willis cognitive framework that is popularly used in those cognitive studies. And the study identified 3 factors contributing to comprehension difficulty. And these were length of the, firstly, the first one is about the length of the questionnaire. Second one is about the abstractness of the wording. And the final one was the use of 5-point Likert scale. So furthermore, factors such as women's education and participation in specific activities of the project can influence women's responses, which we call topical exposure. Like before collecting the data, women were exposed to different trainings related to the self-efficacy questions. So women with more education may understand the question more, and participation in those gender session activities may also increase women's understanding of what the questions are asking, as well as influence them to agree more that they have decision-making power. So 2 main factors identified. One is about the lengthiness of the questionnaire, which is responsible for respondent fatigue. And the next one is about the exposure to gender sessions that they have received in the past before conducting the study. Okay, so based on that findings, we wanted to understand if a self-efficacy module that is emic validity and contextually appropriate. So we have applied for a funding to Ideal to use this cognitive method to develop a contextually defined perceived self-efficacy scale. And another objective was to see if the time and resources needed to conduct such studies that will be helpful to develop culturally contextualized module. So we used a cultural domain analysis method, and to identify if self-efficacy model with emic validity could supplement the existing self-efficacy module that developed from the ProEA. In doing so, we conducted key informant interviews first, and then based on the result from key informant, we conducted free list interviews, and then we, based on the results, we developed questions related to self-efficacy, and those questions were validated in a focus group discussions. And then we conducted the survey to validate the cultural model. And finally, we conducted another survey to collect data on perceived self-efficacy that we developed based on the cultural, based on the key informant interviews, pre-list interviews, and we also collected information on pro-UIA self-efficacy module, and also we used the generalized self-efficacy module as well. We did it because we wanted to understand which module could supplement each other and which one is, and also to understand if the contextualized self-efficacy model could have put the in terms of resource and time for encouraging other practitioners. So this is not part of results, but what we have gathered experience by conducting two studies in two different settings, particularly the self-efficacy module that we developed in Bangladesh. The results of the research demonstrated that a contextualized self-efficacy scale explain a portion of resilience capacity, that is not explained by generalized self-efficacy that included in the pro-UIA. And another interesting finding is that the internal scale validity was higher for the general self-efficacy than the perceived self-efficacy that we developed. And this is not surprising because the contextual factors, I mean, the domain of self-efficacy people mentioned during the key informant interviews and during the pre-list interviews, that is a bit different from the generalized self-efficacy model. So we are not so much surprised with this result of internal scale validity. And then the self-efficacy scale identified through the cultural domain analysis includes livelihood assets from the resilience framework, namely human capital, social capital, financial capital, and physical capital. We wanted to compare the results with these four types of resilience across the self-efficacy modules that included pro-UIA 1 and generalized self-efficacy 1 and the self-efficacy module that we developed. These forms of capital have external influence on locus of control, and these are not extrinsic. So in contrast, the general self-efficacy scale only capture a self-assessment of intrinsic abilities or a self-assessment of being able to act on one's belief in own capacities. Though the other part of the pro-UIA do capture these intrinsic livelihood. So that is something that complement each other, like when a pro-UIA self-efficacy module did unable to predict a particular section of resilience, and where self-efficacy that is culturally validated able to predict that. So the cultural model collected from our respondent about self-efficacy bridges this link between beliefs in one's abilities to achieve something and the livelihood assets needed to have the ability to act on those beliefs. So that is something based on the performance that they have did or they mentioned during the data collection. So in summary, we think it is worth the time, effort, and resources to conduct a cultural domain analysis to define self-efficacy in a culturally meaningful way. Yeah, that is all from my presentation. Thank you so much, Meredith.
Thanks, Colin. So what we're going to do now is to start discussing about the different tools and the different ways to measure self-efficacy. Feel free to ask questions.
Thank you, Colin. That was really, really interesting. I was just wondering, you spoke about, I think, interviewing 22 different participants. I was just wondering, was that over, say, one round of cognitive interviewing, or were you able to come back and say, test your survey again over a second round of cognitive interviewing? or were there kind of logistical or budget constraints which meant you could only go with the one round of cognitive testing?
Well, it was one round cognitive interviews, and after that, we also interviewed with the project people to have the exposure of the findings of the cognitive interviews as well.
Yeah, thank you for this. Just to ask another question.
Yeah, Greg.
I was wondering, doing these self-efficacy questionnaires, how you may, or is there a way to kind of validate the answers, and perhaps it is through cognitive methods, but say somebody is kind of systematically overconfident or overestimates their ability, like, is there a way, say, to then ask a similar questionnaire to their spouse or something like that to get a reference point?
Thanks. It's a good question. It's a question that others have asked. So the example I'm most familiar with is kind of in the measurement of like subjective well-being. So like life satisfaction, like how happy are you? How satisfied like are you with your life? And you have the same thing where you can have people that are just like, I'm happy or a happy person. I'm always going to be kind of on the upper like end of that scale, regardless of kind of like what. And so you want to assess someone kind of like internal scale, and so that's so you can use a vignette, like, so it's you would read like a short kind of story that presents us, that has more detail on a situation that we would have confidence, that we would have more confidence on, that everybody's going to kind of interpret in the same way. So kind of like, this is an unambiguously like happy situation or something like, and then you see kind of how much they agree with that situation, and then you can use that their response there to kind of like calibrate their responses on these others. We haven't, like I say all of that, just kind of like, we haven't done that. We've never used that approach with in ProWea. It's you can also do, I mean, there's psychometric measures to kind of understand like how well like an item set is working, and if there's a risk of, I mean, you can look at things like, are you getting a lot of responses that are on like either side, like either extreme, and that tells you like something might be going on where there could be a reason to kind of go to that length with the anchoring vignettes. I don't know if so that's one approach. I'm sure there are probably others. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in on that.
Just to add with Greg, in our study in Bangladesh, during the development of culturally appropriate self-efficacy module, we conducted some FGDs with the community people to validate the questions that we developed. And during that exercise, we did three things. Like, firstly, we wanted to have their opinion if the questions are understandable to them. And secondly, we rephrased the questions that was actually developed and asked them the original one first, and maybe after asking few questions, we rephrased the first question again.
Seems like Colum has maybe lost connection there for a moment.
Oh, sorry, I was just dropped due to the internet issues. The third thing that I was talking about, we asked the question if you are agree with that or not, and if the respondent is agree, then we ask further, are you agree strongly or somewhat agree? I mean, we spelled out for the 5 Likert scale question, and we also added one option like, I don't understand the question. So that was something that helped us to understand our question is understandable or not. Yeah, thank you so much.
Hazel or Greg, what would you say? I mean, what's your feedback on the, the amount of time it took to go through using these cognitive methods to develop a self-efficacy scale versus using the 4-item that you've reduced for the ProWea?
So maybe I can start, and then Greg can come in. I think and you raised this point too, Meredith, or a bit earlier on, the extent, how much time it takes, just even that time it takes, not even including the IRB process to get the protocol. It's something we hear a lot about ProWea in general. And so for us to do that even for just one indicator is really tough, because even getting people to look at, not just this, but other indicators of agency, it's already quite challenging. So I'm a little worried about the time and resources it takes. That said, I mean, obviously there's clear value to kind of getting that insight. And so what I'm wondering is maybe what would be nice to do, so maybe, I don't know, this could be your next proposal or something, is to test this kind of at a larger scale, maybe having multiple settings, kind of doing the testing, the development, coming up with it, and then looking at it, maybe how that process goes across multiple settings, but sort of in a coordinated way, and not just going into one setting, doing kind of really deep dive and then doing it again, but sort of kind of trying to see if is there something about maybe this process that's generalizable, or something like that. I mean, maybe that's a contradiction, because having something general is not context specific or something like that. But anyway, I mean, this is kind of the tension that we're always kind of navigating, right? Or some donors want something comparable, and therefore that means there's not a lot of room for these, context specificity. But at the same time, it's like, how do you do that? And do you do that like for every project, or does it make sense only in a specific kind of project? I don't know. Maybe these are more questions than answers. But Greg, what are your thoughts?
I mean, along the same lines. I think it would be challenging for us to take on as part with, like, in the context of ProWea, but especially, I mean, I think it would be really useful to see. I mean, interesting. I mean, to see the extent that, like, your results based on this one project would generalize to another project, like, that's geographically, like, really close, or in the, like, and then something that's further away, but, like, is similar in some other way. But I think along the same lines as Hazel, is like understanding, kind of trying to figure out kind of like where's the line between, if there's some kind of middle ground between something that's like fully contextualized, something, or versus something that's fully generalized. But if finding that middle ground, I think, would be of a lot of use and really interesting.
Yeah. And like, when would, if it's at the beginning of a big project, maybe it's worth the time to take that time investment, so that you can monitor, you can include it in your monitoring and annual survey. But if you're just doing like a quick survey, I mean, you don't want to spend 10 weeks or even 6 weeks developing a contextualized. Tanya has her hand up.
Hi, thanks. So my understanding from how the ProWea is used, you would be kind of looking at a control versus a non-control group, or a before and after intervention, and looking at change in those various different domains and against those three different agency groups. So what I didn't see, and this is what I might have missed, is, so we were looking at there'd been a reduction to a 4-item scale. So when you did your more locally contextualized version of this, what did you get as your item scale? That's what I kind of seem to have missed. But was the question put out that was like to the women or the communities you were working with, about how would they measure growth in their self-efficacy over time, or if they went through a training program or had some other kind of intervention that they were involved in? So that I'm sure that's kind of what you were doing, and I'm apologizing that I may have missed some crucial bits there. Sorry.
So to answer the part about the contextualized scale, the process that we went through was with the key informant interviews and then the free list, which is all part of this cultural domain analysis. It was to get people to tell us what self-efficacy, to define it. It was, we did the in-depth interviews that we coded to kind of identify the different domains or themes inside of the questions. When we ask the key informants, what does self-efficacy mean? And it was those interviews were kind of more guided discussions. They weren't just like a Q&A type of thing with the key informants, to really try and unpack what is self-efficacy in this context, instead of coming at it from an outsider definition. And so that whole, the methods in that cultural domain analysis, the point is to really get a culturally defined measure. We didn't ask how would you measure change? What we did ask questions like, what in your community, what are characteristics of a woman who is confident? Because that was kind of how the self-efficacy was really defined, was confident or belief in your abilities, which was interesting because that's how it's defined. We define it, Bandura defined it, but we didn't, though, say what would be like a milestone or what would be a threshold to say that someone is empowered or has self-efficacy. And that's a really interesting point. That would be a good question to ask. Hazel and Greg, do you have anything to add to that? Or Colin?
I think it's perfect. Firstly, we defined self-efficacy. So what does it mean at the local level that we conducted the interviews? And then the key terms like how they express self-efficacy. So self-efficacy in Bangla is different from the other ethnic study context where we conducted the study. So we went through each and every local term and every local characteristics of self-efficacy. So that's how we come up with a different sort of definition that exists in 3 different communities. Yeah.
So when we think about this question of kind of defining a threshold, that's part of that. That's part of all of that's a step in the process of developing all of the indicators that are part of ProWea, because it's all, we have to define that for each indicator and then for the index itself. So we approach it in a few different ways. One is very data driven, where we look at we had for this indicator, I think we had 6 or 7 different projects that had included this in their baseline and inline tools. So where we kind of consider kind of every possible way we could define someone as adequate or inadequate in this indicator. We want something that's somewhere in the middle, where you don't want to set an indicator like this where it's too low, and then it's not that meaningful when someone kind of goes, crosses that threshold, and at the other end you don't want to set it too high where there's no room for growth, so it wouldn't be useful in a context of a impact evaluation. At the same time, we also have ProWea includes very detailed kind of qualitative protocols. So we also have that. That provides context for us as well, to make sure that we're not defining someone in considering someone empowered who when you talk to them, or when you and that the qual would kind of suggest is not the case. And so we'd always try to keep kind of those two things talking, the two teams talking to each other, and the two data. So it's not always a straightforward process. We do try to be as rigorous as we can about it. I don't know if Hazel, you have any?
I was gonna make a more provocative comment if we're at that stage, kind of towards the end. So maybe just to echo some of the criticisms we've been hearing throughout the years around some of these, maybe not only on self-efficacy, but just in general around how context specific can you get. And so because there are also qualitative tools, right, to get at self-efficacy along with other agency kind of aspects, do we really need a scale, I guess, is the question. Like, is a scale necessary, or is this something that's better left to the qualitative work to do? And of course, I'm saying that as somebody who's developed it as a scale, but it's a question we always get. It's like, well, maybe this is not the best. This is not the best. Approach is not to create an indicator for it because it is very, very context specific. So anyway, just to want to throw it out there, maybe Meredith, I'm sure you've heard this before. What is your reaction, or others in the group, if you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder that a lot about the different psychosocial measures and these subjective measures, but I mean, well, there's an obvious reason for collecting quantitative data, and that is for the donor and to be able to show, intervention success, just from in the development world. But it is there that, I mean, this is one of the reasons we did the work we did, is like, what's better? Can you quantify someone's self-efficacy without knowing how, well, I guess that's the first question, is can you really quantify empowerment? And that's your provocative question, I guess, are we trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, really, by trying to measure something like empowerment? At the same time, coming at it from a qualitative, if you use these qualitative methods to then develop a quantitative tool, it might be a little more culturally salient, but you're still trying to measure someone's, you're measuring someone's perception about themselves. I think this goes back to what Greg was asking earlier, about, how do you account for someone maybe overestimating their own self-efficacy? I don't know. Does anybody else in this session have thoughts on this? I think we're actually at the end of the session. Well, thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, just a huge thank you from the ANH side to you guys for being here and putting on this event. I think it was absolutely fantastic. So thank you, Meredith, Greg, Kalam, and Hazel as well. Thank you so much for walking us through this really interesting discussion.